And maybe good morning, it's Fanny Potier. It's a pleasure to be with you. Whilst we wait for this couple of minutes and before Claude officially introduces the masterclass, I invite you to fill in the short survey on leadership. The results will be used on the masterclass number 2. And voila, if you have a couple of minutes whilst we wait for 1 or 2 more minutes, please feel free to fill in the survey, and we can come back to it later if you want.
Okay, so let me start because we are already 75 people. So I think it's a good point to start. So welcome and good morning, everybody. I'm very honored and proud to welcome you and for this first masterclass of a series of 3 on leadership in new normal. Thanks for the participants to keep their mic off. It will help because we are a large number of persons. It's obvious that leadership for each of us is key to tackle societal, technological, and economical transformation. But on top of it, with the crisis we are going through, I'm personally very much convinced that it requires an in-depth reflection of what leadership is needed to face all these challenges. And that's the reason for which this series of masterclass was created. So I think it's already too long as an introduction. So immediately I want to let the floor to Fanny Potier. And before that, I just want to thank a lot Fanny Potier, who is a partner at BCG on transformation, people, and leadership strategy. I want also to thank BCG, and Fanny and BCG have been extremely instrumental, to say the least, to develop this masterclass. So a big thank to BCG, and we are very pleased to have this series of 3 masterclass with them. So I let you the floor, Fanny, and thanks again.
Thank you very much, Claude, and because this is a thank you moment, thank you very much for the French Alumni Association to host us this morning. So just, you covered that already. I hear some background noise. Can I ask, as Claude invited, everybody to keep the mics off, please? Because there are many people in the room, and this will be quite disruptive for us if we hear some background noise. So just a quick word of hygiene rules about the meeting. So there are many of us in the room. This is for you guys. So please listen with undivided attention. And there is a moment to listen to a great panel of speakers. And this is a moment to learn for you. And there will be a moment in breakouts where you will be able to share with others. So it's a little bit give and get. So as much as you can, be there with us and contribute to the session. There will be a roundtable with Q&As about 50 minutes, and I'll introduce the panel very shortly. We have prepared some questions, obviously, but if you want to ask some questions of your own, please use the chat box that you see at the bottom of the screen. And Claude and myself will do a bit of moderation there, and we'll direct the question to the speakers. Then there will be a moment when you're sent in breakouts, and there you will be positioned as an executive committee of a company which has to discuss a complex issue, and hopefully you will be able to leverage some of the insights that will have been shared by our panel of speakers. And then we kindly invite you to go back to the plenary for some closing words together. So as Claude mentioned, this is the first BCG French Alumni Association Masterclass on Leadership, and there will be 3 of those, okay? And this is about leadership in the new normal. In this series, we wanted to propose a reflection on what leadership is needed today to address the immediate crisis that we're all going through, whilst at the same time preparing for a transformative future. And we really wanted to start this conversation with a discussion on complexity, and how leaders can deal with it. And before we dip into the content, I wanted to start with some introduction on complexity, drawing on BCG perspective, informed by about 20 years experience of helping companies cope with this business complexity. And actually, from this perspective, the most interesting impact of the pandemic has been the way it has disrupted this complexity, complicatedness dynamic that I will introduce. And more on that later with our speakers. So our research shows that over the past century, business complexity, and that is the proliferation of multiple and sometimes conflicting performance requirements, has multiplied roughly sixfold. To manage complexity, companies typically create new organizational structures, roles, processes, systems, even ever more elaborate matrix organization and metrics and KPIs and scorecards to track progress against these multiple objectives. This paradoxical result is an explosion in organizational complicatedness. So we'll use complexity and complicatedness to design two different things. During the same period that this complexity, this external complexity was increasing by a factor of 6, organizational complicatedness in response was increasing by a factor of 35 times. And I'm sure you know what I mean by that. Metastasizing complicatedness has taken a significant toll on organizations, and it is a serious obstacle to real and value-adding work. And as such, it's a major cause of stagnant productivity in many developed economies. The pandemic, on the one hand, introduces additional dimensions of complexity to the business world, and I won't go into them. You all know them, you're going through them. On the other hand, because of the very suddenness and shock of the pandemic that caught organizations completely off guard, they couldn't respond in the usual way by multiplying complicatedness. We didn't have time to develop a chief COVID officer position. Instead, organizations were forced to rely on something else, the intelligent adaptation of their people. To talk about the matter more, and this is going to be part of our discussion this morning, I'm really happy to introduce a great panel of speakers. And I will start with welcoming Xavier Fontanet, who is a former BCGer, and he's the former Director General of Beneteau, of Heurest, and former CEO of Essilor. Xavier is also a former board member of L'Oréal, Schneider Electric, and other institutions. Xavier is still very active and keen to transfer his extensive experience on strategy, leadership, and people. He has developed a strategy program jointly with BCG that you may have seen on BFM, and is the author of several books. And from author to author, it is my pleasure to announce his soon-to-be-published book early next year. Thank you, Xavier, for making the time with us today, and welcome. Marie is Managing Director and Partner at BCG. She is leading BCG People Strategy for Western Europe, and she is also a core member of the Healthcare and Operation Practices. Since joining BCG in 2007, Marie has developed two passions in her professional career, biopharma and people. She has deep expertise in the biopharma and in particular vaccine industry, and she has supported many leaders in development strategies, industrial performance, digital transformation. On the people side, she is also convinced that company transformations have to be fully people-centric to be successful. Thank you, Marie, for being with us, and welcome. Guillaume is the head of BCG in France. Since joining BCG in 1997, Guillaume has covered strategic and operational issues in the consumer industry, ranging from mass market to luxury, and from food and beverage to fashion. One of his passions is to team with C-level executives and functional leaders at our clients, but also at BCG, to transform companies and generate short and long-term impact. Guillaume works across the globe and has accumulated significant experience in large-scale transformation. Guillaume holds an MBA from INSEAD. Finally, I will be your master of ceremony today. I'm Fanny Potier. As Claude mentioned, I've authored a book, Pro on Leadership in 2020, which is at the origin of this masterclass, but not only that. I'm working at BCG, and I'm also from MBA as Guillaume. I have a long experience in people and leadership strategy consulting, and I am convinced that the human factor is at the heart of innovative, agile, and sustainable organizations. I am a mother of 2 amazing children, and I strive to leave behind a better world for them. And with that in mind, I believe that as leaders, we have an important role to play within our organization to steer the world in the right direction. And current times are certainly providing us with many opportunities to do that. Without further ado, let me start with asking a question to the first member of our panel, so Guillaume. I would like you to tell us what do you think are good ways to manage external complexity?
Good morning, everybody. It's great to be here. I hope you can hear me well. Fanny, you're right to mention in your introduction that there has not been a better time to talk about complexity, right? And I think the COVID crisis, as you said, revealed the fact that many companies had become way too complicated internally to manage external complexity in the right way. So when I think about this, the short answer is complexity needs simplicity, right? And let me try to explain what I mean by that. I think, first of all, for me, it starts with strategic clarity, right? So the company, the leaders need to be 100% crystal clear on what the strategy is, but it also needs to be understood all across the organization, right? So in simple words, simple terms, needs to be understood. And the reason is it creates focus, right? Focus and alignment. So that's number one. I think the second one for me is you need a very strong culture, and I would argue in a culture that promotes trust and empowerment, right? I can use a different word. I could talk about a decentralized organization, right? And the reason why that is important to deal with complexity is complexity has become so complex, if I may. There isn't one single organization at the very top, no matter how smart people are, no matter how much AI you put in there, that can deal with the whole complexity in the whole world. So the only way to get there is to push it down in the organization, right? That's what I meant by empowerment and trust, because if you push it down and you decentralize it, so you let people who are very close to the customers, the consumers, to make the decisions, essentially, you have to trust that they will do the right things, right? So it's both the culture of trust and empowerment. Right? And the third thing is you need great talents. Because it is not so easy to empower people all across the organization. And so you need great leaders, but you also need great talent across the company so that they always act the best they can and that they empower others, right? And it's not that easy. So for me, those are the three things. And the role of the leader is actually to make sure that those three things are happening. So bringing the strategic clarity and communicating it, making the culture vivid. Trust is not something that is a given, right? It needs to be proven every day, otherwise it goes down the drain. And then making sure that the great talents are in the right place in the organization. So the leaders need to make sure that those three conditions actually happen, and that everyone can, the organization is up to the challenge of dealing with the complexity. Back to you, Fanny.
Thank you very much, Guillaume. Very interesting. Another angle that, Marie, I would like you to perhaps give perspectives on is what does it mean for you to be open to the outside world in such a complex world?
Hello, everyone. I hope you hear me well too. So great leaders are actually leaders that are constantly looking to the next change and the disruption that will affect their company. And this change can come from technology or from a new business model. And companies that were in a position of indisputable leadership in the past, I think of those that had significant scale effects, like Nokia or Kodak, were disrupted hard by the external world, something that they had not seen coming and that almost killed both of their company. I was trained on leadership in my early days at BCG by a partner that has now retired, and that was truly prescient in leadership. That was Rosalind Torres, that you can listen to. She had a fabulous TED Talk. And she started talking about new ways of leading before anyone else, just at the turn of this century, arguing that the leadership of the 21st centuries would be defined by three questions. The first one is, where are you looking at the next change to your business model? The second, what is the diversity measure of your personal and professional stakeholder network? And the third one, are you courageous enough to abandon a practice that made you successful in the past? Those three questions are always been very insightful to me. And these answers to these questions can actually found in what you are doing today. Who are you spending your time with? Are you internally focused or externally driven to understand what will come next? And great leaders understand that a more diverse network is a source of better understanding of solutions, because it gives them access to people that can think differently, that would bring other perspectives, and complex issues require different perspectives to generate a multiplicity of options and unleash innovation and creativity. So this diversity starts, of course, internally by building diverse teams from different backgrounds, using different methodologies to develop innovation and creativity. One of those examples in the companies that I work with are, for example, the performance of hackathons. Some of you, maybe all of you already know that these events that came from the software industry that were aimed to develop in a very short, limited amount of time, innovative solutions. This is now very successfully used in other industries, and it's really taking the idea that you bring cross-functional multidisciplinary teams together, and with the time constraint, they will bring innovation and creativity to the solutions they develop. Other methodologies, probably more emerging still in the companies, are the design thinking. And this is something that should be implemented more and more in the companies. Another thing, once you've worked internally, is really to get connected to the external world and create platforms of collaborations. If I take the pharma industry that I know quite well, connection to the external world are a necessity. The R&D processes and feeding their pipelines with new products is always become more and more difficult, and that won't change. And to that end, companies have located R&D centers in very dynamic and innovative locations. For example, in Boston, where university, biotechs, VCs, other companies are also located. But what they also do is that in other places around the world, they create in their own spaces innovation hubs, where they actually foster innovation by integrating the local biotechs, integrating local experts to really source science, technological, digital innovation that may impact their whole value chain, and to the aim of actually being close to that innovation and buying it before anyone else, which is truly what matters when you are leading a company, leading a team. Seeing and anticipating that disruptions before anyone else and integrating that into your processes and products.
Thank you, Marie. So that's again a very interesting angle, and I have actually two questions. So I will start with one to Xavier. So Xavier, with your long experience as a leader of global organizations, how do you think, or is there a way to manage better complexity and to transform that into a sustainable competitive advantage? And then we'll come back to the question on innovation later in the discussion. Xavier, I think you need to unmute yourself.
Okay.
Okay, yeah. That's okay. We hear you.
Okay, so first of all, excuse myself. You know, I speak what call Japanese English. German was my first language, and I decided to go to MIT when I was 20 years old. So I had to learn English very quickly on my own. And I practiced mostly English in Korea, Japan, China, and India. So I talk Japanese English, and I use myself for the British people, okay? But just what I can do is basically share my experience, you know. And of course, the world is very complex, and all my time has been to simplify. And the French people will understand. I always say, simplifier, prier pour nous. The French people will understand. So my job has been always to simplify and help all the people working with me to simplify, learn to simplify. Now, the way I did it basically has been to try to put a good atmosphere in the company, you know, to put trust. And I've been thinking a lot around the trust. What is trust? And to me, trust is basically three things. People have to trust themselves, you know, and the trust is a very fine line. You shouldn't be too much trustful, because when people are arrogant, you can't work with them. Nobody can work with somebody who is arrogant, he doesn't listen. You should have enough trust, you know, when you compete, all the company compete. So people have to be good, and they have to trust themselves. You know, people who don't trust in themselves, you have to help them. So it's a fine line between too much and not enough, okay, trust. The second point is to have to help people to trust the others. You know, the second dimension of trust is to be able to trust the other. I remember when I was at BCG, the first time that John Barnes was the boss of BCG Perry, he trusted me to make a sale. I was only manager, and you know, at the time, only the vice president had the right to sell a contract. I was still manager, but the customer wanted me to work on the contract. And the big boss of Paris told Xavier, I trust you, you can start a study. This customer is very important for us, do a good job, because if you don't do a good job, you will damage BCG Paris, but I trust you. And the day my boss trusts me was a great day for me, okay? So, and I know when I trust my colleagues, I give them a strength. So the second teaching process for a boss is to help people trust the other, okay? When you trust each other, you create a very, very strong atmosphere. Now, this is not sufficient. When you manage clever people, you cannot have a good atmosphere if the strategy is not good, okay? So, of course, to me, the strategy is absolutely critical. And especially for the French people. When you work with Chinese, or when you work with Japanese people, or US people, or German people, they have a lot of discipline. So usually they obey the boss, even if the strategy is bad. With French people, it's totally impossible. If you don't have a good strategy, the French people will disobey. The French people love to disobey to show they are more clever than the boss. So managing French people is very, very difficult. And they were the most difficult to manage, according to my experience. So I developed a lot of technique for them. And to me, Napoleon, you know Napoleon, our emperor, he is a genius. So he had very bad aspect because human people didn't count a lot for him. But Napoleon had a very good trick. The day before the battle, he was on the field and he was visiting all the soldiers to teach them what would be the strategy of tomorrow, okay? And the soldiers were very proud to have a direct contact with the big boss. And the big boss was explaining them the strategy, and they could discuss with the big boss what would be the strategy. And when the emperor left the meeting, all the people said, Emperor, you took us as responsible people. We will be there tomorrow. We know what to do. Thank you for the trust. So to me, I think it's a very good example. To create a trust atmosphere is really to help every individual to trust himself, to be sure that people trust each other. And if people are able to break the trust, you have to take them out of the organization, okay? Because it's very complex to create trust. It's very easy to destroy the trust. So the responsibility of the boss is to make sure everybody is aligned around this concept. And of course, the strategy. To me, I've been teaching strategy to everybody in the company, even to the workers. We had a big discussion on strategy in the factories, even in the delocalized factory in Philippines and Thailand. And if you interview the worker of Essilor in the Philippines and Thailand, they are able to tell you the strategy of the company. So when you put all this together, you create the atmosphere. Now, the second point, which is very important, you have, of course, to reward, you know, to create a dynamic of trust, you have to reward for the success. You have to reward immediately. It's a big mistake not to reward, because if you don't reward, everybody, you will kill you will kill the aggressive, not the aggressiveness, but the motivation, okay? But maybe more important than rewarding, maybe you have to, when there is a mistake, you have to use the mistake to teach so that the people don't do the mistake again. Now, if you succeed in rewarding quickly, okay, and in teaching the mistake, then you create a very good atmosphere because the people start to move. Because whatever happens, they learn. Either when they make a responsibility, because the crux is that people make responsibility, okay? You have to give the maximum responsibility to the maximum of people, to train the people. But if the people who have responsibility know they are rewarded if it works, or they learn from the mistake if they fail, then everybody moves. And that has and you come the creativity. It's very strange what happens. Individual people become very creative at the time by some mystery. But it's a mystery, but it's a miracle because I can tell you it works very well. So it has been my way of management very early. And I've been really developing those ideas for a long time. So that's maybe my message, okay? And trust is a mystery, okay? But it happens, I can tell you. And I know now I have contact with my competitors, the Japanese competitor, Mr. Sato, who was heading Oya, the most dangerous competitor, and we have been meeting and talking after. And he told me, Xavier, that's where you made the difference. Okay, that was my point.
Thank you, Xavier. Very, very clear, very inspiring. Claude, do you see a question that we can address in the chat box?
I think there was a question to Marie to precise a little bit more how hackathon can be useful to manage better talents in an organization.
Yeah, that's indeed a good way to engage them, because you can actually take talent, high potential people that maybe not really visible in the organization, and by putting them together, you actually expose them to other parts of the organization if they're not yet been in contact with them. And then by making them work on some new solutions and making them actually present that to the whole group or even to the COMEX, if you frame it like that, you actually expose these new talents to the rest of the organization. That's a big reward for them. That's a big visibility that you can give them, and that creates engagement. Building on what Xavier is just saying, that you give responsibility to people to build something new, and you give them the visibility, which is an immediate reward to the work that they've been doing during this hackathon. And this is I mean, tremendous in re-engaging, letting people reinforce their positions within the organization, even very early talent.
Thank you, Marie. Going back to Guillaume, in this complex world that we have described, I'm curious to understand if you could share some insights on the various planning activities that happen at clients, because there are some lengthy processes around budgeting, strategic planning, etc. I'd love that you comment a little bit on are there different ways to approach that, or can we refocus each one of them to make sure that they're impactful for organizations?
Yeah, so most of the financial processes have been on the table for years because they typically don't reflect the business very well, right? So typical financial processes are for 12 months budget, and then you do a strategic exercise for 4 or 5 years, but it's more of a fiscal cycle. It doesn't really embed and cover the business. And so in times of COVID like this one, when there is increasing volatility in the world, where things are unexpected from 1 week to the next, from 1 month to the next, in various geographies of the world, of course, the typical financial processes are becoming totally obsolete. What I have seen working, but not adopted widely, I need to confess, is an approach that adapts the cycle to the nature of the discussion, right? It's been said all around, so there is a strategic discussion to happen. You need absolute strategic clarity, and strategy by essence is a notion of answers the question of how do you allocate your resource, right? And it isn't something that you change every morning, otherwise everyone gets lost. So you need a 3, 5 year, maybe 10-year horizon cycle to set the strategy, right? So that's one planning angle. You don't want to stretch it out too far because that goes out of any management cycle. So I think 3 to 5 year is the good time horizon, and then you can start planning on that. Then there is a second time horizon, which is for me 1 to 2 years, which is mostly around people. 1 to 3 years, let's say. So it deals with the structure cost, the HR planning, recruiting, promotion, etc., which is typically the time horizon that you need to change your organization, adapt, right? You don't adapt an organization from 1 week to the next. It typically takes 1 to 3 years. So you need to plan for that. And of course, embark the people. And then there is a shorter term planning cycle, which is more like a quarterly or monthly cycle in some industries, where you reallocate the discretionary resources. So typically in the FMCG world, those would be resources behind brands that you can change every month, very tactically, right? In other industries, it might be Salesforce, it might be all of the resources you can change quite rapidly, right? But I think you need to have those 3 at least layers of time cycle, and according to your business and your industry, segregate the discussion across those time cycle and treat them differently, as opposed to having a linear budget cycle in 1 year and a linear strategic cycle in 5 years, right? That's what I've seen most companies adapt. And I think to the latter point, we at BCG have done something which I found amazing, and many companies are adopting now, which is looking at high frequency data, credit cards, aggregated numbers, mobility numbers, of course the pandemic, etc., to forecast the next 4 to 12 weeks. And that time horizon is very precious for companies because it helps you, as I said, on the resources behind your business, on manufacturing, it helps you on supply chain. It's very operational, and that can make a huge impact if you can forecast the very short term.
Thank you, Guillaume. Just going back to Marie and expanding a little bit on what you shared already around, being open to the world. How do you invite clients and other external stakeholders to your change and innovation journey as an organization? How do leaders do that?
Well, I invite them by giving them sometimes the comfort to be courageous. I mean, that can be very brave of me, you may think, but there are tools to do that, because great leaders, they're there to be different. They don't just talk about risk taking or doing things, they actually do it. But taking risk doesn't mean being reckless. What does it mean? I mean, when there is tremendous uncertainty ahead of us, and current situation with the COVID and the vaccine. I mean, you've probably all seen the news yesterday. We are all hoping for something to come, but we don't know if it will come and when it will come. So the trajectory seems very much unpredictable. When we are facing such situation, we can build strategic scenarios of potential futures. These scenarios should be the combination of assumptions of key factors of your industries combined with mega trends that will be affecting your industries, macroeconomic environment, demographic data, technologies, etc., etc. And based on these scenarios, you would build a portfolio of projects in which you will invest. So that would give you comfort about having put all the data into the analysis to try to frame and map and anticipate what can come. Based on these scenarios, you would have some projects. And another thing that you need to also consider is, how do you then invest? You may want to minimize your risks and eventually make a lot of different investments in different projects, but that will fragment your resources. So my advice would also be to take some bets on innovation and potential disruptions to focus on, so that you invest sufficiently in those bets so that they would become successful. One leader I've been working with told me that it had proven better to him to always make decisions and bet and move forward rather than stagnating and delaying the decision making, even when this decision that he had made proved wrong several years afterwards. Indeed, if you think that you can be on all fronts, as I said, you will fragment resources across different projects, you will not invest in us, you will reassure yourself, but eventually it will just lead to being reactive and catching up about what's coming rather than being proactive and anticipating real and major disruptions. And that can resonate also with what Guillaume has just been said in the budgeting exercises, right? But then, of course, strategic scenarios are not set in stone forever. They need to be updated frequently by monitoring the variety of indicators that you would be tracking. And another tool that I use is the military OODA loop as a guiding principle. What does it mean? Is that you first need to observe in order to adjust the reference scenario with the changes that are coming, to the changes in the data that you are looking at. You need then to orient by identifying the strategic options, the new options, according to what you've seen and your starting point. Then you need to decide on the most effective option, and then you need to act accordingly. You always need to go through this loop: observe, orient, decide, and act. And the idea of running this loop is also to increase learning in your organization, to facilitate the thinking process of going from strategy to action, even if you do mistake, as Xavier was saying, to really always be in the thinking process and acting accordingly. This is fundamental to preparing the corrective actions that are required. And in the world we live today, adaptation and changing is the new routine and the new normal. And it is also useful to continue making progresses and continue making decisions, because uncertainty may also prevent some of your leaders from actually engaging into the action mode.
Thank you, Marie. There's so many questions I'd like to ask, but I'll come back to you, Xavier. And I wanted to come back to something you said when we were preparing for the masterclass. You articulated actually in relation to this point of being open to the outside world, a paradox, which was innovation and copying competition or mirroring competition. And how did you lead your organization in order to always be ahead in terms of products and services, and whilst integrating the outside world in the picture. Unmute yourself, Xavier. Xavier, you're muted. Xavier, you're muted.
Okay.
Okay.
You're good now. One more click.
Oh,
One more
Good.
click, yeah.
okay.
Perfect.
Okay, so that's okay. Yes. Well, that's the very important point. The way to get a consensus in a company is to position ourselves with respect to outside world. You know, usually when a company or a division doesn't work well or has not a good atmosphere, is that the people are among themselves. Okay, and the world is just the company. The way is to open the eyes and to say to the people, no, you compete with outside world. And of course, you have to open the organization to the outside world, to know who is a competitor, who know who is a market. And of course, we need good competitors. And to me, I love tennis because, you know, Federer, there is a very interesting interview of Federer. You know, he lost Wimbledon 2-19 against Djokovic, and he had two match points that he lost. And he was very disappointed, but he said, you know, I am very thankful to my competitor because without Nadal and without Djokovic, I wouldn't be able to play as well. That's the basic idea I always teach to the people in Essilor. We are very lucky because we had two absolutely outstanding competitors, a Japanese company, the name was Hoya, and a German company, Zeiss, okay? And those were really top competitors, and we have been growing thanks to the competitors, okay? So of course, Essilor had a spirit of creativity. It's true that in the ophthalmic business, the two big inventions in the last 50 years in the ophthalmic field, that plastic lenses and progressive lenses and photochromic lenses, the three major inventions come from Essilor. So the company was very good in creating new products. Now, it's very difficult when you have a company with good in products. Usually manufacturing is not at the same level as R&D. Of course, against us, we are the most efficient company in manufacturing in the world was Hoya. Hoya was a Japanese competitor. And the strength of Hoya was world leader in lenses for camera, you know. He was producing the lens for Nikon and Canon. He was world leader in the disk, all the disks that you have in a computer and the server. Hoya, 80% worldwide market share. And in the mask that you use to make microprocessor, you know, that Intel, you put in, Hoya at 70% market share. So Hoya is probably one of the best manufacturers you can imagine. So we had to face this company. We were better in marketing and better in R&D, and it was better than us in manufacturing. So all my job has been to say, okay, we have our strengths, which is new products, but the weakness we have is manufacturing. We have to learn from our competitor, okay? And we have been very sensitive to know how they work. We learn a lot from them. And of course, they were taking advance from time to time with new technology, but Essilor has been a company that was very, very good at copying. And the name of the game has been to have in the same company talents that are able to really have a creativity, okay? That was a talent, but at the same time, we are good followers. So we were at the same time very good innovator, but very strong in following. And that's by the combination of the two that we have been able to become by far #1 in the world. So that's very important in trust. Trust, you have to build trust also in difficult environments. I had the question about what happens in bad times. Trust is very important at time. And the key of, you see if you build trust, if you keep trust in the bad time. And even though the history of Essilor looks at a very nice story because the company has been growing for, I don't speak about present time because I know more in the company for 7 years. But in the time, the 25 years I knew, of course, if you look at the number, the company has been growing constantly. But it has been always very difficult. We had to face a very tough time. I remember, for example, being a French company during the Iraq War in US was a very tough time. Because all the people were against us, okay? Because the French people were against the Iraq War. So for a company, I can tell you, in US, it's very tough to be a French company in US at the time of Iraq. At the time of 2007, 2008, the time was very, very tough. We don't know it so much in Europe, but I can tell you in US, in Asia, we had also the SARS in 2004. Okay, it's very far time, but at the time, Essilor China was really working very well, and we had to face the SARS in a growing company with a lot of problems. So, and you have to keep trust. So trust is something that is not only for good time. And if you are able to keep trust in bad times, it is what really puts people together, you see? So it's a very delicate subject, and the name of the job of the boss is to be sure trust is sitting always in the company. You have to protect trust all the time. And it's, to me, the big job I had. Some people are able to damage the trust, you know, and usually they create some baronies, you know, baronies. So the guy is defying the boss, and he's going to the people to say, you obey to me and I'll protect you. You see what happens? And you have always baronies in the company. If you let a company grow, you are killed. So I am a very nice person, but 2 or 3 times in my 25 years at Essilor, we had to kill barons. And I can tell you, at the time, I was surprised how aggressive I could be when I felt that the trust could be damaged dramatically by people. And the only way you can do it is to take the people out of the company, to protect the company. And so that's trust is not an easy thing to do. And trust to me is really to compare yourself with the outside world. The best way to put people together is to show the danger that you have outside the company. That's the way to put people. And Oya, the best thing to me to manage Essilor has been to say, oh, be careful. Oya is making a strategic move against us. Everybody is coming. You see? So you need, in some sense, you need the danger of outside to keep the strength of the company. That's my answer to your question.
Thank you very much. Very interesting and very true. Claude, I think we have time for one more question. So I think there was one question.
Yes, in a way, rebounding to what you are saying, Xavier, there is a question. What should be the yardstick to assess and promote leaders in different levels of the organization? But I think the point important is, how do you apply this trust in your way to promote leaders? And maybe also the question can be answered also by you, Guillaume.
Maybe Xavier, you start, and then Guillaume, you complement.
And then Guillaume will comment. There was a question about how you reward. You see, how you reward. So the first very important point at Essilor is that employees own a part of the company. Okay, so they have shares, and when the company works well, of course, the value of the share increase. And we have been very happy because in the period I was the chairman of the company, we multiplied the value of the company by 30. So I can tell you that we had 1,000 millionaires in the company. There is not one guy with billions. You have thousands of people with millions, okay? And this is a very interesting point because you have the reward, for collective performance is built into the company. Now, at the time that the collective performance is rewarded, you can be very explicit of individual performance, okay? And of course, the very important thing is that everybody in the company has a part of the responsibility of the total company. And you can ask a lot to the people for their individual performance, given that the collective performance is rewarded by employee shareholding. You got the point? Now, rewarding people is of course money, but the second reward is promotion. Okay? And that's why I am very sensitive to the budget. I am not a financial guy, not at all. But I love the budget because the budget is the period where you can plan the year. So myself, I am for a yearly budget, because in the budget you discuss with everybody, and everybody knows exactly what is his or her responsibility. Okay, and I spent almost 3 months at the budget. You know, with my direct reports, I had almost five 1 hour face to face, to be sure. And I suggest that you read the life of Nelson. You know Nelson, the British is a genius. Nelson to me is as powerful as Napoleon. And you know Nelson, it was very interesting. He was preparing the battle during days. And the day the battle started, he was sleeping. He went to bed. Because he said the battle is so well prepared that I can sleep. And the story tells that he was sleeping, really speaking, during the battle. And he said, you only wake me up for the bad news. Really, if it goes bad, you wake me up. But he was so confident in the strategy that he was able to sleep during the battle. And I read many books, and for the soldiers, it was very refreshing to know that the big boss is sleeping. So I go too far, but I can tell you that kind of story is very important. And to me, the budget is very important, especially because it's the way you give responsibility to everybody. Because you make your budget with your direct report, but your direct report make their budget. Okay? So if you have a company with probably 12 people by line, you can have a very large company, very few stage. There was 5 stages between me, the chairman of the company, and the worker in the Indian factory. So this is the way I manage the company. And to me, budget is very important, very important.
Thank you, Xavier. Maybe Guillaume, you want to take 1 or 2 more minutes, and then we'll kick off the breakout if you want to add something.
Yeah, on the reward thing, right? On the how do you reward? So I agree with Xavier, and it's interesting, Xavier, because as you know very well at BCG, the reward also comes with equity, right? Like Essilor in a different model. So yes, money is definitely part of it, promotion as well. I think I would add 2 things. One is trust. You know, we talked a lot about trust. When the company gives you the trust and the mandate to act with trust, I think this is a big way of rewarding. It was interesting, Xavier, when you mentioned your experience when you were at BCG, and the first time, you know, the institution tells you, you have my trust and you can act on it, is a very big moment, is a foundational moment, right? And the last thing I would add on reward is visibility. Visibility internally and externally is something that people are always very proud of. Right? If the company can organize that, that's a very good way of rewarding them as well. So, you know, companies always have these conferences internally. You know, you can put people on stage. They are very proud to be the face of the company inside, but also outside in the press, in expert conferences. So that's also a big way of rewarding people beyond money. And I would argue the beyond money, money is necessary, right? Let's not kid ourselves. But I think the beyond money is way greater than the money, right? And it was interesting when we looked at family firms a few years ago, over 5 decades, versus firms that are listed and less family owned. And it was interesting to see the different HR patterns trading off between salary and non-monetary reward, right? And family firms sometimes give less money, but they have a much broader palette of reward that goes beyond money, that people are in fact emotionally much more connected to.
Thank you, Guillaume. So I just use that opportunity to thank you very much, Guillaume, because I know that you have to continue the day without us. So thank you very much for your participation and the great insights that you brought to the audience, and enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anne-Marie, it was great to be here. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you, Guillaume.
Okay, so we have still 30 minutes together. So we wanted to offer an opportunity for you to take away some of the learnings that have been shared by the panel. So in about a couple of minutes, once I'm done with the instruction, you will be sent to breakouts, and there will be 6 of us in each of the breakouts. So please, I think you know Zoom and how it works, but just pay attention to the wording, because sometimes it's a little bit confusing. And make sure that you click on the word join breakout. So the setup is very simple. We didn't want to make it too complicated. So you will be an ExCom member of a company, and you will be the ExCom of a certain company. It doesn't matter which one. And you are presented with 2 topics. And I hope you paid attention to the link that was sent to you, because we suggested some pre-reads. So there are 2 situations that are available to you for you to discuss. There is no expectation. This is only a time for you, and this is a time for you to discuss together and to integrate maybe, or to expand on the learnings. We won't facilitate, because there aren't simply too many of us. And just when you're in the breakout, just pick one of the 2 companies for discussion. And after 20 minutes, you will be prompted to go back to the plenary. And again, pay attention, because sometimes we click on the wrong button, and we'll just have a couple of minutes of closing words. Quick reminder, so the 2 discussions we wanted to offer were, on the one hand, you could consider Netflix success stories. We picked very known companies because we hope you're a little bit familiar with them, if you can't, if you haven't done the pre-read. And just as a group, discuss what would be the takeaway for you if you were, you know, to build on their success. And alternatively, because it's good to learn from mistakes, as Xavier said, you could consider Kodak downform, and similarly, but the other way around, what could you have done to prevent that from happening? Okay, so Juliana, to you to send us to the breakout.